I'd only directed one play before, which was a production of Blood Wedding that I did in the spring of 2014. And I'd enjoyed it so much. I mean, I'd long been an actress, but I'd never directed before, and it was just such a wonderful creative experience that, you know, literally the week after we'd finished the Get Out for Blood Wedding, I was like, I want to do this again. I want to find another play that, you know, I'm enthusiastic about bringing, you know, my vision of it to life. And so I literally Googled great plays for women because, you know, I'm a female director. I wanted to put on plays about strong female characters and that would give actresses the chance to play amazing roles on stage. And so Great Plays for Women was what I entered into Google, just looking for something. And These Shining Lives was one of the plays that I found on that Google search that came back. And it just connected with me straight away. I didn't really know anything about the history. I think it maybe rang a vague bell. I think, you know, like some people have sometimes heard of the dial painters, you know, that get sick and they get dyed, and I maybe had heard of it, but I knew none of the detail. And Melanie Monich has just done such a beautiful job with the script that I immediately fell in love with these women. And knowing it was based on a true story was just incredible. It just adds so much power to the script because you're thinking this is real. These are real people. And I've always been the type of actor and director that is all about the backstory. So I love knowing every detail of, you know, whether I'm playing the character or whether I'm directing the play. I want to know everything, you know, what is their favourite ice cream, you know.
All of it.
All of it, exactly, the whole thing. And of course this was a gift because it was a true story, which meant I could go away and research, you know, beyond the play script. And so that's what I did as a director. I wanted to put on a production that was authentic so we could, you know, see what the wedding was like, try and imagine, you know, both from historical fact and from Melanie's play, you know, who are these people? And it was through that process of research that I was like, there is no book that's actually about the girls themselves. You know, there were books on their scientific legacy, there were books about, you know, the radium craze itself, you know, this crazy idea that we once used to eat radium chocolate and, you know, it was kind of marketed as a cure-all, you know, when actually it's poison. And so I was just astonished that there wasn't a book about them, and so it was through this sort of research process for the play that I realised that the women didn't have a book that was about them, and of course I'd fallen in love with them by then, and so really felt passionately that they deserved a book that told their story and that could get people interested in them, because I felt largely they'd been forgotten. And I thought if there was a book that, you know, used their own voices so that allowed them to speak out and have a platform for their story, then hopefully, you know, people would be engaged by it in the same way that they are when they go and see the play. But this is a chance for the women themselves to have a voice. It's not, you know, I don't really feel that I'm speaking for them. I feel like I'm almost their ghostwriter, and, you know, and it's their story. So rather than it being a playwright putting words in their mouth, this is hopefully them with their own words in their mouths, you know, speaking to you, you know, through the historical fact, basically, and through a narrative that people can, you know, get excited about and read. I was heartbroken by the detail of what I uncovered. You know, I can still remember being so shocked to realise that Catherine Donahue would have found out she was pregnant. You know, she found out she was pregnant after she got her radium poisoning diagnosis, you know, and you work out the dates of that and you just think, oh my God, because in the play, which is obviously how I first discovered her story, the kids, you know, she has the children when she starts work. So it was just that thing of thinking, you know, you've got this poison attacking your body and yet you're also pregnant, and just, you know, how young the kids were then when she did die, you know, those sort of heartbreaking details, you know, reading the details of their medical treatment, you know, Quinta Maggie and MacDonald, who had to wear this plaster cast from her diaphragm to her knees. You think of that, you know, and she had it on for 9 months. And you just think, as I say, so for me it was these small details of what the realities of their daily lives were like that I was just stunned and heartbroken by, you know, to read the medical records and, you know, read about Grace's spine, you know, the vertebrae being crushed in her spine from the radium, and you just, you know, that for me was the horrific thing in looking through. And I think also I knew the companies had lied, and I knew they covered it up, and I, you know, knew they tried to get away without, you know, taking responsibility. But again, to see those company memos and to read the dismissive attitude that they had towards the women, to realise that they knew, you know, that the radium firms themselves are publishing studies before the women get sick about the dangers of radium, and yet when it comes out, they're like, oh no, that, you know, that's only a large amount. It's, you know, and it's like, no, you've published a study
Yes.
that's dangerous. How can you now say you knew nothing about it? And so I think that again was the sort of shocking thing, was to actually see in black and white the duplicity. And you know, I can remember sitting where I'm sitting now in my living room in London and saying they knew what they were doing, and they still hurt the women. And that for me was really shocking. So not surprising as much, but it was the details that really made, you know, it kind of hit you to think, oh my God, this is what they went through. This was their truth, their reality. You know, these girls usually came from poor working class backgrounds who were desperate for the money. To get a job as a dial painter, which is so lucrative, was you know, jammy. They thought they were kind of lucky to get the work, which is why they promoted it to their sisters and their cousins, and you ended up, you know, with whole sets of siblings and families working alongside each other. But they were mostly teenagers, so it was young women. Later on, and I talk about this in the book, they actually allowed some mothers to come back and work, and the company were quite, particularly the one in Illinois, were quite open to that, and they said it's because it was such a skilled job that it was actually quite hard to retrain people. So later on, some mothers did come back to work, but the primary sort of demographic of the dial painters was young teenage women. So if we take Ottawa as an example, you know, they have celebrated their heroines. There is a statue in Ottawa to the Radium Girls, which is commemorating, you know, everything that they achieved, which is wonderful. You know, there isn't a statue in Orange in New Jersey, for example, which is, you know, I know a lot of readers have found quite shocking. They're like, why has Ottawa got one and we don't have one? But equally, the flip side of that is that I've actually heard from some readers who've read the book and then they've gone out to Ottawa, and when they say, oh, we're here for the Radium Girls, there has, according to them, there has been a bit of coldness sometimes, you know, from residents that, oh, you're here for that, we don't really want to talk about that. And so I think there's still a little bit, again, that's just anecdotal, you know, for me, everyone I spoke to was keen for it to come out, you know, people were receptive, they gave me interviews, but I was talking to the families who wanted their relatives to be remembered. You know, particularly in Ottawa, there weren't any safety procedures. So Peg Looney's niece remembers seeing the building being torn down. She was in a French class, she said, in high school. And the dust just went everywhere. And so that's radioactive dust because the building was contaminated. So there's this radioactive legacy within the towns themselves as well, that they've had to, you know, the EPA has had to do a big clean-up operation, and it's still going on. There was a big case in New Jersey in 1928 where 5 of the girls were suing. That ultimately ended in a settlement out of court. And then there was another case in Illinois, which was led by Catherine Donahue, which actually went through, it wasn't through the courts as such, it was through the sort of workmen's compensation scheme. And that one did get its guilty verdict, but the company appealed it, I think, 8 times. So it took years and years and years to get justice, and they only finally got this sort of final guilty verdict in 1939. And if you think the very first Radium Girl to file suit did so in 1925, so it actually took 14 years for any Radium Girl to get, you know, a guilty verdict. what I found, another thing I found shocking in the research was reading statements from the 1970s from people in Ottawa that was asked about the girls from the 1920s and 30s, and they were all like, I still don't think radium poisoning killed any of them. They were sort of, they were sick to begin with. They were weak. They didn't. They were just using it to, to pass, trying to get money out of the company. So that's the 1970s, and they still are calling these women liars and cheats and frauds. And so I think for the families, really, in speaking to them, as I say, they wanted the truth to out, because for decades afterwards, it was still being covered up. That guilty verdict didn't really mean anything in the sort of community gossips. And so they wanted, justice to be done, and for these women to be remembered as they were, both as people, but also as honourable women. Things weren't any easier for them as they are for us now. In some ways, it's probably even easier for us because we can connect to each other so much, more easily now. But I think the lesson to remember is to look at what they achieved. They were women, as I say, they're operating in a time where women are seen as second-class citizens. Let's not make no mistakes about it. That was the truth of the matter at that time. And yet in banding together, they were able to make a difference. They stood up and were counted. They thought this was something that they wanted to fight for, no matter how difficult it was, no matter about the fact they were getting shunned, these powerful corporations were trying to silence them, they kept on fighting. And so I think, for me, the lesson that they teach us is how important it is to stand up against injustice, and that if you band together with like-minded friends, you can bring about change. And so I hope that is the sort of inspiration that people can take from their story, that you look at what the Radium Girls did and maybe you think, I can do that too.